Welcome to the Connected Lawyer Podcast. I'm Aaron.
And I am Bryan. So, Aaron, we were talking the other day about setting up a new computer, and I found out you had a checklist for this. So,
I,
I'd love to talk to you about that.
I do have a checklist. I've been maintaining a checklist for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years to do this. And I do that for a few different reasons. First of all, I like when I set up a computer, I like it to be systematic. And I have been kind of, in that life where I manage a bunch of computers for different people. And I sort of need all of the computers to be built, exactly the same way. I need them to have the same configuration so that if one is acting weird, I basically can rule out a lot of potential variables, and I can go through and say, okay, this is like the perfect way to set up the computer. And so now I'm going to set up every computer, that same way every single time. A lot of people will do this with imaging, and I've never, really sort of been a big enough organization where it made sense to image a computer and then stamp them out that way. And so I just tend to do it with I call it a device configuration procedure, device management procedure. And I've been doing it for a long time. The other thing I will say is that I have gotten in the habit of rebuilding my computer pretty frequently. So I do that, at least once a year, usually twice a year, or I will just completely start over, with a factory reset computer and build it up from scratch. And I do that for a lot of reasons as well, but mostly it's just kind of, I would say this, when I talk about this in seminars and whatnot, I kind of think of a computer that it gets thatch over time that you have to sort of clean out. And it's probably not, it's not a perfect analogy, but you install things and then you uninstall them, but they don't cleanly uninstall. And over time, the computer just seems to run slower and slower, because it's just got so much thatch in it. It's got like so many overlapping programs and overwritten data and things like that. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And that's certainly that thatch concept is certainly something I think you will see if you have a computer that you've been using for 2 or 3 years and you haven't rebuilt it, that you start to see that it does things more slowly than it used to. And it's not getting tired. It's a
Yeah.
computer. I mean,
It's like it's old, it's worn out, just
right.
moves slower, right?
Right. Yeah. I'm in my 50s now. I move slower, but that's because I'm a human. Computers, like, their parts generally either work or they don't. It's not
Yeah.
like they wear out.
Yeah, you're picturing like it's all rusty inside, and
Right.
the parts just aren't moving as smoothly anymore. And I will also say, and maybe this is kind of paranoia on my part, but I sort of like the idea of doing a clean slate because of just for security purposes, and it just sort of feels like, to the extent that there's malware that's sort of residing on the computer that's undetected, or that it has a kind of a security misconfiguration even, that's left it vulnerable to attacks. Starting over with the factory kind of a clean slate and rebuilding it from a known secure procedure can give you a sense of, just a little bit of a sense of starting over. It can like a sense of security, I suppose.
No, absolutely. I agree on that. And anytime I've ever had any sort of incident where it seems like something's not going right here and it could potentially be malware or something, that's one of the things that is sort of my first step is, okay, let's scrap this thing and start over again. And that just gives you a sense of comfort that whatever was there before is no longer there.
Yeah. And it can also be kind of a business continuity thing as well. So I have two laptops that are pretty much identical. I just bought a new one actually on the President's Day sale because that's, to me, in my experience, that has always been the best time of the year to buy a new computer is right around President's Day for whatever reason. They just go on ridiculous sale. And so I got a new computer for a really, really good price. And so I'm looking forward to setting it up. But I've always just kind of maintain two laptops in rotation. So there's the one that I'm kind of using now, and then there's the one that I'm building and getting ready to swap out. And then I'll swap that new one in when it's ready for production. I'll take the old one, and as soon as I get comfortable, I'll wipe it clean and start rebuilding it. And I have this, I guess, a philosophy that anytime I will see any kind of weird security thing, and you'll have this where your virus protection software will trigger on something from time to time, and it will say, the virus was quarantined or the virus was deleted. I don't move on from that. As soon as that I get something like that, like a positive indication in the Microsoft security system, that computer's toast. I will immediately remove it, shut it down, and deploy the new machine, and then factory reset the old one and start over. So I just don't, I don't like to. I I don't know how to explain it, but it's like once a virus protection alarm has triggered on my computer, I never like that computer again. It's sort of
No,
like I remember my first car, like I loved it so much, and then one day I sort of like took a turn a little too fast and dinged the muff or dinged the back bumper on a guardrail. And it's like, yep, I don't like this car anymore. it's it's damaged.
here's the one thing I will say about your idea of having two essentially identical computers is ever since I found out that you were doing this, I've been jealous and wanting to do this myself, though I've yet to pull the trigger on it. But and mostly because I'm running from a Microsoft Surface. I absolutely love this machine, and Microsoft never puts it on sale.
Yeah, that's right.
And so I know you run Lenovo's; they're fantastic machines. And honestly, anytime anyone in my family says, "What should I buy?" I push them to Lenovo anytime that I can for a couple of reasons. One, they just make great machines, and two, that's what my wife uses at her job. So that's something I'm at least familiar with, like how they work and that sort of stuff, as is she. So if there's a problem like with my mother-in-law, she's got essentially the same computer my wife does for work. But again, she got it on one of these great deals from Lenovo that they run on these the holidays. So she got a really good deal on it, and it makes it a lot easier to have some familiarity with it. But
Yeah,
anyway, I've always been
I like Lenovo's too,
yeah.
and from my perspective, like the benefit of a Lenovo, and at one point I got a different brand computer off Amazon. I was just so disappointed with it, if because it doesn't do the things that Lenovo does, and one thing in terms of using it for a business class machine is that Lenovo is built for business. And so part of that is just kind of the security procedures around their own assembly process. That the computer from the all the different parts, all the suppliers, the manufacturers, the supply chain is done in a secure way. And they have, large sort of large industries that have heavy security compliance requirements around them. And so they're kind of constantly being audited. And so there's a little more comfort in knowing that you're not going to get a rogue chip or, a bad component that's installed on the motherboard that presents a security risk. And so that's one reason. The other thing that I would say about Lenovo is that just the way that they manage firmware is so detailed that, and I just really like that. They have this firmware management program called Lenovo Vantage, and so what you do is when you do Windows updates, you can also run Lenovo Vantage, and it will go through as long as your computer is kind of factory original and it's built per a Lenovo specification, it will have every single component of that computer has firmware that gets centrally managed by this Lenovo application and is constantly updating. So it updates the BIOS like every couple of weeks. It will update the video driver, the keyboard driver. Like every single part of this thing is very, very easy to update. And a lot of computer manufacturers just don't have that level of firmware management. And I just really appreciate that.
Yeah, they're great machines, and like I say, I push anybody who asks me, like I try to push them that direction if at all possible, and I always point them toward one of their business class machines, just for the reasons you said. They make fantastic machines, and they run sales regularly where you can buy them at a pretty good discount. So,
Yeah.
um,
And your
again, I'm on
Surface will
board
have
with
all
that.
those. Like Microsoft
Yes,
Surface would have all those benefits as well. The security, the supply chain, the firmware management, all of that is controlled by Microsoft. So that's kind of can bring that security comfort as well.
right. And so I have my Surface. I love it. And I've always sort of been jealous of your two computer setup. And the main reason is that you can just swap in that other computer sort of on a pretty quick basis. And what happens to me when I have this situation, I need to rebuild my computer, is essentially I spend a weekend rebuilding my computer
Hmm.
and getting it back to where I want to be. And if you have the two separate machines, you can give that rebuild a process over time. So you're not devoting, basically 2 or 3 days to this. Uh, Instead, you can do that over time. And then whenever you need to swap it in, you can. So I
Yep.
think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
I haven't done it yet.
Well, and that's the other reason to keep a device configuration checklist as well, because like you said, you don't have to take a 3-day weekend to do this so you can get back into production. You can do it over the course of weeks or even months if you're on this rotating schedule. But then you don't you know exactly where you left off before, because you just get your device configuration checklist back up, and I'll make a copy of it, specific to this build, and say, okay, well, I've gotten as far as I'm going to get on it today. I'll probably come back to it on Wednesday, and then I could just break that thing out and pick up right where I left off.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you had actually shown this to me, I don't know, some time ago when I was rebuilding my computer, and I'd forgotten about it. Just whatever. And we got a new computer in the house uh, over the weekend, just an extra computer, not work related for either myself or my wife. Um, and I was setting it up and realized I had done some stuff in the wrong order and remembered that had I remembered that Aaron had shared this checklist with me, I would not be in the position where I was now starting over on some things, going sort of backward in the configuration and restarting it because I did this um, out of order some things. So if you don't mind, can you just sort of give us an overview of what this checklist looks like? And I think we can post a link to this in the show notes as well. Whenever,
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I can go ahead and throw it into like a share file folder and put a link in the show notes. But and so just kind of hit the high points of it here in the show, and I break this down into kind of three sections. The first one I call the core configuration. The second one I call the initial domain join, and I'll kind of say what that means in a little bit. And then the third one is the end user configuration. And the end user configuration is where you kind of it can get more specific. And so, for me in my checklist, I have kind of a list of the things that I know that I need to have on this computer. Like, we talk about our TechIt Outlook plugins, and I feel completely lost without those. So I put those on my checklist, but maybe not everybody uses it. And we talk about like active words, for example, which now is in my checklist, and so as soon as I realize I don't have that on my computer, it feels like it's not working right, because that's become part of my sort of my core
right?
my core process. So that's that last part. But the first part, core configuration, I think would apply to pretty much everybody, whether you're a lawyer or not. Even if you're just sort of a home user and you've bought a new computer at Target, I think core configuration is kind of a good thing. And so the first thing that I will do is factory reset the new machine. And I will admit that I do kind of go through this thought process as to whether or not I need to do that, especially when I've bought a brand new Lenovo computer directly from Lenovo. But generally speaking, yeah, I will factory reset the computer completely. And the reason I do that is that I just want to start with sort of the cleanest possible install. I want to get down to the sort of the most basic level. And so when you do a factory reset, usually you will eliminate kind of a lot of that stuff that I call thatch. Like for example, it oftentimes will not reinstall free trials. It often will not reinstall kind of add-ons like Candy Crush or the McAfee 30-day antivirus trial, kind of all this I don't know what you call it. It's sort of like adware or something like that, where they're trying to get you to sign up for a subscription. And I just really, really don't like that stuff. All I want is the Lenovo firmware, and I want the Microsoft Windows operating system above that, and then that's it. Like the cleanest possible Microsoft installation that I can get. So I'll do, and also I think to the extent that you aren't comfortable with the security supply chain, kind of doing a factory reset and a fresh, cleanly downloaded instance of Windows 10 Pro can get around some of that. Some of the, if there's kind of a security issue that's in the software layer, or if it's in one of these add-on programs, that the Candy Crush isn't completely secure. As a hypothetical example, that's just something that that I don't need, that is normally, for whatever reason, packaged with computers that I buy. It's there, and it's like, I didn't order this. I don't know if this is needs to be on my machine. Even if it's secure, it's taking up space.
Right.
So anyway, yeah, factory reset, and I say this, that it's the most aggressive options. So delete all the data, reformat the drive, completely start over. So that's the first step. As soon as I buy a new computer, even if it's brand new, it's never been used, that's usually what I will do.
And I will say, before you go on to the next step here, that this sort of goes back to what we were talking about in the last past episodes about, you really need to think about the stuff, the programs that are on your computer, and
Right.
not to have things there that you don't need or don't use, or that you don't have a business case for. So this gives you a great sort of foundation to start from. Like, I'm starting clean. Anything
Yeah.
I add from here, I am choosing to do so.
Yeah.
And I should have a reason for that.
That's a really good point. I think we talked about that in our second show about the LastPass breach, right? When they were starting
Right.
to release details about that, and it turned out it was like a third-party video editing software that was on one of these high administrative users' account or on their computer, and it ended up capturing some information in kind of a keylogger fashion. So, yeah, no kidding. I mean, you don't know. This computer that comes prepackaged with a lot of free trials and things like that. I mean, how much military grade security do you think really is around Candy Crush? Which again, I just bring it up because it just seems to always be pre-installed on
Mhm.
computers, and I didn't order it. So yeah. So anyway, once you get that, a complete factory reset, and you're operating, with a freshly downloaded instance of Windows, and you kind of go through this initial, kind of an initial out of the box configuration, hook it up to a trusted Wi-Fi, so I wouldn't do this on an internet connection that I didn't think was clean and firewalled and
So
secure.
don't go to Starbucks and do
Yeah.
this.
Well,
Is that what
yeah,
you're
right,
saying?
exactly. You want to do this in a place where you're downloading the core software for this thing, and it needs to be clean. Um, and then as part of this, and this I'll kind of talk about for a second. There's a place in Windows, and this assumes that you're buying Windows 10 Pro, not Windows 10 Home, and which, again, as we always say, I think if you are a professional and you're serving clients or customers in a professional capacity, a consultative capacity, whatever it is, I think they can expect that you're using business class software. It costs a little more. There are reasons why it costs a little more. And this that I'm talking about in terms of Windows 10 Pro versus Home, there is a reason that it costs a little more. There are more features that cost more money for Microsoft to build and maintain, and this is one of them. And so what you do when you're going through this initial step of Windows is you want to tell it to set it up for an organization, and which may sound a little strange, but what that does is it unlocks a progression path in the Windows setup process that will allow you to um, do a domain join, which you are going to do a domain join most likely in this case. But even if you're setting up for your home and there isn't a home domain to join, you want to do this anyway, because what that does is it unlocks the ability to right off the bat create a local admin account. And so this is what I will like to do, and we'll call it, local machine or whatever. So we're going to make a local machine user that has full administrative rights, but only on this local machine. And then later in this process, you'll see, if you download this checklist, you'll see later on we will delete the built-in administrative accounts that come with Windows. Why? Because they come with Windows, right? Everyone knows they're there.
Everybody knows them. It's like not changing the password on your router.
It's like that. Yeah, every computing device or system that you buy is going to have a built-in admin window. Well, the reason is because you need to do some admin, when you take it out of the box.
Right.
But then when you're done with that, you're done with that. So you delete those accounts once they're no longer needed, and then they're not there. And so instead, we're going to create a special admin account that has a special password that only you know, and then it's only administrative rights for this computer. And as you unpack that, like, we could probably do a whole show about why that is, but I think a lot of times in the show we'll talk about, this idea of the principle of least privilege, that you only want to log into something using the least privilege that you need in order to do what you're doing. That way, if there is a security hazard there waiting for you, you have fed that virus or whatever it is, that malware, the least administrative rights that you needed, and so now it's contained as much as you can. And so you don't, for example, if there's a problem with a local computer, the computer that's here in front of you, and it says, hey, I need admin rights for you to look at this. Well, don't give it admin rights for your entire network. You don't need that in order to deal with just this one computer. And if there is a virus on the computer and you've given it admin rights to the whole network, not only can it now spread through the whole network, but it can actually create a new user using the admin rights you just gave it that also has admin rights. That's called an elevation of privilege attack. And the more we learn about security, the more we know how these hacks will happen. And the more that we know why you have to be super careful when you're traveling, for example. I was just reading about this attack the other day, where it's a 2-line script. Okay, just picture a text file that just has 2 lines in it. And the lines are basically create new user as a domain admin and assign new user the following password. That's the command. And you can store that as a script, basically a batch file, in the all users folder. And then this is, from the perspective of a hacker. Then you create a problem with that computer, like you disable the network card or something like that. And then you call tech support. Well, tech support normally shows up with domain administrative privileges, logs into the computer as domain admin, automatically executes the script that's sitting in the all users folder, which creates a new user with domain admin rights and with the passwords. Well, and anybody who has access to that computer can do that, because all it requires is a guest account, right? Somebody who can put something in the all users folder, which, if you're a user, you kind of by definition can put things in the all users folder. Well, imagine you're at a conference and, there in the hotel is this very helpful little business computer in the business center that you can use to check your email and this, that, and the other. Well, that's something anybody can use. This is a computer anybody can use for any reason. And you just kind of play this out if you wanted to be a malicious person and try to take over that computer. And if the hotel personnel are logging into the computer with domain admin rights, that computer could be quite compromised, as could the Wi-Fi and the rest of the network. And so, anyway, long story short, that when we build this new computer, we want to create this nice, clean, fresh local admin account so that when it asks for admin privileges, we're not typing in our Microsoft administrative password. We're just typing in the local admin password to the local machine. And so the virus can only do things on the local machine. It doesn't get outside the local machine. Make sense?
It does. And like so many things that run through my mind whenever you start talking security, I'm now terrified. But
where have I been? What have I done?
Yeah, but I will say, just from my perspective, this whole thing about joining a domain, Microsoft does not make that easy. Like, if without your checklist, doing that is actually quite difficult. To work your way through that on your own, but being able to follow your checklist so that okay, I need to do this step, and then this step, and then this step, and there's an order to it, and I can join the domain, and then I've got it all set up. I in general, I like Microsoft products, but sometimes, man, they make this stuff complicated for what seems like no reason.
I will say Microsoft makes it easy to do it the wrong way. I think that, what in my opinion, like you can just take a Microsoft machine out of the box and turn it on and set it up and start, sending emails.
And it works great.
And it works great, but it isn't the most secure device in the world if that's all you're going to do. And it is kind of a shame that, this company that has a brand now of being, hypersensitive to security, it kind of feels like their unboxing experience is not, you kind of have to know what you're doing in order to, make it secure. So, but yeah, I think kind of a checklist approach is helpful. They do have tons and tons of documentation, but it's, it's thick, it's kind of obtuse, it's voluminous. So, hopefully this checklist will help somebody kind of get a little further down the road. So after you've done all that, and now we're logged in as the local administrative user, a brand new user account, and we're not joined to any sort of domain, and we factory reset it, so we don't have anything but the Microsoft operating system running on the computer. The next thing I will do is I will apply all the updates. Okay. So that means we're going to go into the Microsoft Windows updates and we're going to update it. We're going to go into Lenovo Vantage and we're going to update it. If there's any software on there at this point that would be outside the scope of that, like sometimes you might have included in your subscription, I don't know, like Adobe Acrobat or something, go in and update that. Or a better example would be that you might have included in your subscription that there's Microsoft Office, comes installed, like it's packaged with your Windows 10 Pro account. So you want to go in and update Office and just sort of update everything you can think of. And when I say something in the checklist about, continue updating until it's irrefutably updated or something like that. And what I mean by that is Microsoft has this thing, and I guess I can't blame them. I mean, I guess it's just like the way things work. But this will happen every single time. You go in to the Windows Update and you say check for updates, and it will download some updates, and it will say, congratulations, your computer is fully updated. And then you'll click check for updates, and it will say, there's 16 billion updates you need to. Some are urgent and critical. Like, okay. So, and part of the reason is, honestly, that some updates will trigger the need for other updates. I mean, that kind of makes sense, right? If you get an update to the .NET framework, then it can say, oh, okay, well, now you need an update for, for this that you didn't need before you had the .NET framework update. And so I will go through this process and I just kind of, check for updates. If it says there's no updates, I'll reboot, turn it down, bring it back up, check for updates. And I just keep doing that sort of over and over until I get to a point where I just feel like, okay, now I've got a nice, clean, fully updated, completely serene kind of computing experience ready to be built upon. Right. And
this computer will never be this good again.
That's right. That's now would be a good
It's
time
all
to take
downhill.
a to do a restore point, right? Before we mess it up. So yeah, that's a I think that's a good place to start. And then I guess the last thing that I would do in terms of sort of building this clean slate would be to two things. First of all, and this is in the checklist, and this may seem sort of, I don't know, sort of hyper technical, but it is my opinion that Microsoft ships with an unnecessarily weak encryption cipher strength. Okay, and so you could check this if you go into this thing called group policy, and most people think of group policy as a thing that happens on a server, right? And it pushes out rules to all the computers that are controlled by the server, what they call domain joined computers. But in fact, every computer has its own group policy, and there's a place, and it will walk you through in the checklist. There's a place that you can go into the local computers group policy, which another way of saying this would be like the local computer's sort of internal settings. You know, like the settings that are not available to you in the graphical user interface. You're going sort of inside behind that and adjusting the settings behind the scenes, the underlying settings. And for whatever reason, the cryptographic cipher strength of Microsoft Windows is there. It's behind the scenes when it feels like it should be sort of front and center. But anyway, you go into group policy, and specifically, you know, it's Windows components slash BitLocker drive encryption slash choose drive encryption method cipher strength, which is only applicable to Windows 10 Pro because you don't even get encryption, you know, with the Windows Home machine. That's another reason that you pay for Windows 10 Pro if you're a professional.
Which
so
is not that expensive.
No, it's $100 more. Okay.
Yes,
It's
and
it's silly to not pay it.
It's worth every penny. I tell people that. I'm like, I don't care if you're running a business or not. You should get Windows 10 Pro, so you can have the encryption, and also you can control when your updates run. So if you have the home version of Windows 10, your computer updates when Microsoft decides. And now that's good from one perspective because you need to run your updates and you don't want people putting them off forever. But it is nice to be able to say, no, I'm in the middle of something critical. Let's run that update, later tonight, which you don't get that choice with the home.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. There's a lot of management features that are built into the Pro version of Windows that are, sort of necessary. I think if you want to manage your computing environment in a professional way, it just kind of makes sense that you need the professional version of the operating system.
Right.
That's what it's there for. Honestly, I would use Windows 10 Pro. I would not use Windows 10 Home for anything. Because there's no reason to have an unencrypted computer in your life anyway. So you sort of, I almost kind of feel like Windows 10 Home just doesn't need to exist. But anyway, it does. And so if you go into this group policy, then you can adjust the cipher strength of the BitLocker program, which is the whole disk encryption solution that Windows has. And by default, it ships with an AES 128-bit encryption cipher strength, and you can increase it to the AES 256, which I think is sort of the more compliant state of the industry cipher strength for encrypting hard drives. And all I can guess is that, by increasing the cipher strength, you will tend to put there'll be a performance hit on the computer. And so there's an argument, especially if you have less RAM and you have a slower processor and you have a mechanical instead of an SSD, solid state hard drive. If you have the lower end components on this computer, which I would also recommend that you try to aim for the
Right.
higher end things, 32 gigs of RAM, a 1 gigabyte solid state drive, the Core i7 processor, you want to kind of aim towards the higher end. And then if you adjust the cipher strength to 256, it's not going to really slow things down, and it's going to be a much more securely encrypted hard drive, so that when you lose this thing at the airport, you really hopefully don't have a lot to worry about. Everything is encrypted, and it's not a reportable event. It isn't a breach. The client information that's stored on the computer is safe. So I always do that. I always bump up the cipher strength to the 256 bit, and then I apply BitLocker encryption, and then I store the BitLocker key, and I record in my business record, the serial number of the device and the date and the BitLocker key that I encrypted it. So I've got a business record that, yeah, from now on, that device is an encrypted device. It is not a breach waiting to happen. That's what you have to do.
Yeah, that sounds like excellent advice. And I will say, I've been preaching that you've got to keep your computer encrypted, from day one. And that applies, I don't care what kind of computer it is, laptop, desktop, whatever, it needs to be encrypted. And I've been preaching that for years. And I've had a ton of people ask me, well, doesn't that slow the computer down? And honestly, no. I have never seen a performance hit because of encryption.
Yeah.
So
And I can't
it's
say that
just
I have
something
like
you
two
need to do.
laptops operating side by side, one with unencrypted, one at 256, like benchmarking it. I can't say
Right.
I've done that, but get used to it. If there is a performance hit there, it runs fast enough, right?
And let me also point out, we're talking about a computer for our law firm. We're not playing a first person shooter on it. We're
Well,
answering
some of us
emails. Yes, but you know, we're answering emails and writing Word documents. We don't have to have like the highest performance benchmarks. Now I'm with you. Like, get those good components because that'll extend the life of your computer. You'll get better performance. You won't get frustrated. All of that plays into that. But you're encrypting the drive is not going to affect things that will make it more difficult to do those tasks that you need to do as an attorney.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, you make a fair point, because I am a gamer, and I'm running the latest generation games on my computer from Steam, with this higher encryption cipher strength, and they're running fine. They're running just fine. So, and that's pretty much the most, other than like mining Bitcoin, that's about the most intense use you can put to the computer, and it's still running fine. So I just don't think that if you buy the right hardware, I don't think that increasing the cryptographic cipher strength is going to be what's slowing you down.
Right.
It's going to be some other garbageware that's on that computer that just needs to come off.
Okay. So what's next on the checklist?
Well, honestly, at this point, the last thing that I will do here is I'll run Windows in the Windows Defender, which I do recommend as the antivirus solution. The native Microsoft Windows Defender is a very good product for what it does. You can't say that antivirus software is like a complete security solution, but it has a job, which is to look for software that exists on your computer that matches certain profiles. And so Windows Defender does that as well as any product does. It finds the signatures of viruses, and it reports them accurately and properly. So go into Windows Defender. I will run a full scan anyway, even though it's a completely fresh computer with a fresh install. I'll run a full scan anyway, and then I will do the Windows Defender offline scan, which requires it to reboot, and it scans kind of the kernel level of the Windows stack. It's a scan that can't be done while Windows is running in full, because it can't get access to some of those kind of core level processes. So it's called a Windows Defender offline scan. And then I'll make a restore point, and I'll kind of go through a lot of those more specific things. But I think for purposes of our show and the time that that we have to do this, I think that that's a really good baseline, and that would be a baseline for anybody. At this point, you could start installing the software that you use in your practice. You could start, configuring the personal things. And it's also at this point that you want to kind of think about, okay, I've gone through all this effort, right, to create this very clean, secure kind of baseline computing environment. Now be really careful with what you're going to install on this thing, right? Everything that you put on it is a risk. So the cleaner you can keep this computer, the more you can limit yourself to installing things that are necessary to run your business, the safer you're going to be. And I think that's good advice anytime, but particularly now when you have gone through all this effort to create a clean build.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And I've looked through your sort of install your software kind of thing. And I think this is something that I really want to put together for myself. And that is a list of uh, all the software that I need installed on my computer, and then the order that I want to install it. Because there is an order, like as you mentioned earlier when you were talking about Adobe Acrobat. If you install Adobe Acrobat and then you install Microsoft Office, you're not going to have the plugins from Acrobat in Office, and that's just a frustrating situation that you have to go in and fix. Whereas if you install them in the correct order, then when you install Acrobat or whatever PDF software it is, you're going to have those plugins installed. And that applies for all the other plugins as well. And so this is something that I think it makes sense to think about. What software are you installing, and what order are you installing it in? And then make sure that you do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well said. And I will say when I made the very first version of this checklist way back when, and I think it might have been, this checklist goes back to about 2016 is when I made the first version of it. And I remember right around that time, I was working with a brand new laptop, and I was kind of saying, okay, I just don't want this to be built in a willy-nilly way. And so I would do exactly what you're saying. I'd start building it, and I'd think, oh no, that this is out of order now, and now it's too late to create the local admin account before it gets domain joined. So I factory reset and start over. And then I'd get to another point and say, oh, no. This isn't how I wanted to do it. It's factory reset. I would start it over. And I did that. I think I did that about 20 times until I finally got the order that I thought was perfect. And then I've just kind of been tweaking it and improving it, ever since.
And I think that's one key to checklist. And we've talked about this before, and I don't really want to beat a dead horse, but really, like, all of these processes and checklists that we put together, those are ongoing. You should be tweaking or changing something in them about every time that you use it, because things change. So I think that's a good reminder that it's fine that you're moving things around or adding things or taking things out or whatever to this checklist. But the key is have the checklist, know this is the procedure or the process we're following, go down through it and make adjustments as necessary if they're needed for whatever particular reason or case that may have occurred.
Yeah,
Or
and I
just
will say Microsoft's kind of gotten to the point now where they gamify this, and I really like that. And you can do, I think it's the Microsoft Endpoint Security subscription that you can add. You can go into if you have Microsoft Microsoft 365 for Business, I think is a subscription, and the baseline is about $12 or $14 a month. But then you can add on security packages to that, and one would include endpoint, the Microsoft endpoint security. And so what that will do is kind of basically put an agent on your computer. And I have that in my checklist here. And it will look at all the Windows settings and all the third-party software that you have on your computer, and it will push it up to this area of Azure Active Directory, which is kind of your online, when you log in to manage your Microsoft subscription. you log into Azure Active Directory normally, and you start with like portal.office.com, and then as the administrator, and then you'll go into the security settings from there. But anyway, at some point, if you dig around in there enough, you'll find this area called the Microsoft Secure Score. And if you have the right subscriptions, it will give you a secure score for your kind of your online environment, which is where your email and your exchange is, but it will also give you a secure score for your laptop in each laptop that's connected to the subscription. And it will say, if you do this, upgrade, it has an unsupported version of Firefox, for example. If you upgrade Firefox, you'll add a point to your secure score. And like you're saying, it's like you could max that out. You could get a perfect secure score, which I think would be really hard. You'd have quite a lockdown environment if you got it up to 100%. But then even if you did that and then you did nothing, the secure core would start to go down because you haven't applied updates, you haven't checked this log, you haven't done this or that. So yeah, for sure, it's an ongoing process, but it isn't so kind of scattered that you feel like you have to, like, sometimes when you go to a security lecture, it feels like they just took a deck of cards and threw it out into the room, and it feels just completely like, well, what about this virus and what about this threat, and here's another way that you can be taken down. And if you kind of put that into a system and follow a system and a process like the Microsoft Secure Score, I think you can make this sort of routine and habitual, and instead of this frenetic, always responding to the latest, virus news article of the day.
Yeah, I will say, you convinced me to subscribe to Endpoint some
Nice.
period of time ago, and I do remember when I sort of stumbled across that secure score, and I was like, "Ooh, what is this? This is
Yeah,
kind of fun." So I
it's
went
kind of
down
fun.
through trying to two parts of that. One, trying to understand what in the world they were talking about, because some of the stuff is relatively straightforward, like your version of whatever Firefox or whatever needs to be updated. Okay, that I get. And then they'll also say something that literally, although it contains words from the English language, they make no sense to me in the order that they're given. But they do have documentation available. So if you want to learn what that is, you can do so. Or you can just follow the directions and trust that Microsoft knows what they're doing when they talk about security.
Yeah, they tend to do a good job, I think, in terms of where they put their focus. Like we've talked about, they could make the end user experience, I think, a little more intuitive. But gosh, I mean, there's 10 billion moving parts in that system, and not every single one of them is going to be perfectly synced, with everything
Right.
else. And as you go through that secure score, you're going to make kind of decisions about, like one thing, just as a random example, it might say you can improve your secure score if you put two-factor authentication on all your administrative accounts, which is something, if you go to any security seminar, they will say, oh, that should be mandatory. It should be like an ethical requirement that you do that. Well, okay, but isn't that sort of contextual? Like for example, there are some systems that are exist only for the purpose of synchronization. Like let's say, for example, you have a system in place where you're syncing your on-premises Active Directory, which is a kind of a server-based system for keeping track of people and computers, with your Azure, your cloud-based Active Directory. You want to keep those in sync, and there's software that you can use, and it requires administrative privileges to do it, but it doesn't work well if it has two-factor authentication, because these systems don't have phones to receive codes. I mean, it's just two systems talking to each other. And so,
Right.
but then you start to think, okay, well, what's the purpose of two-factor authentication? It's in case mainly I get phished or my password gets out into the wild because of this LastPass thing or whatever. There's different ways that can happen. And you say, okay, well, in terms of this system, that password is never really used by a human. It's never stored in in an environment that is accessible publicly. Maybe the two-factor authentication doesn't really serve a purpose, and in fact, it can make the system less reliable and functional. And so we're going to make a decision to accept the risk of not having multi-factor authentication, and thereby having a lower Microsoft Secure Score, but a better functioning environment. So you have to kind of go through as you do this, you have to kind of get used to that thought process.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's one of those things where you realize that okay, you're never, like you said earlier, I think you're never going to achieve 100% or
Can't
whatever
do it.
scale they use it. It's impractical. And the reality is this is a good way for you to think about the security on your computer and in your firm and in the system, and know or have an idea of what that is, and just sort of what you said contextually. uh, I have chosen to not do X for whatever reason, and I'm okay with that,
Yeah.
and that's a good thing. That as long as you understand why you're not doing this and you're comfortable with that and it doesn't expose you, okay. But that's just, again, just think about it so you understand it. Don't just blindly accept, um, that no, I'm not going to turn any of this on, or yeah, I'm going to turn this all on or something. But no, actually, let's think about these things and make decisions that make sense for you and your firm.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think like a better goal in terms of the Microsoft Secure Score, for example, would be instead of your goal being, I'm going to get 100%, which isn't really a realistic goal, a better goal would be to say, I'm not going to have any unprocessed recommendations in the Microsoft Secure Score environment, right? So I'm going to land at, 90%, 87%, whatever your kind of acceptable secure score is. And the reason it's that number is because here's the list of risks that I've accepted and here's the reasons why. And if you had that, I've either implemented every Microsoft Secure Score recommendation, or I have accepted and documented with a reason the remaining ones, then that's pretty much 100%. That's a perfect score.
Right. Right. No, that makes sense. Well,
Yep.
I'm glad you shared your checklist with us today. I think it's a valuable exercise. One, to actually use this or something like it when you're rebuilding a computer, and two, just sort of to talk through it so you think about uh, what you're doing when you're deploying a new computer, whether to yourself or somebody else in your firm or whatever it is. But that's actually something that's worth thinking about and dealing with from a thoughtful and proactive matter or way, and not just pull it out of the box and say, "Here you go."
Yeah, for sure. And I would love to hear feedback. If one of our listeners kind of, especially if you disagree with something that I've said here, or that we've said, or that's on the checklist, that would be very valuable to know kind of what your thinking is there. So yeah, any feedback is always welcome. Always looking to improve this stuff.
Yeah. So I think this is a good place to wrap up. So thank you all for joining us. If you do have feedback or corrections that you want to share with us, or thoughts, ideas for new topics, tell us why Aaron's completely wrong on his security thoughts. We're happy to hear any of this. Send us an email at info@theconnectedlawyer.com. And I'm Bryan.
And I'm Aaron. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.